Trapped in a glittering mansion, Elena Brooks endures a loveless marriage to tech mogul Nathaniel Cole, a man who sees her as a contract, not a wife. 3 years of silence until one piercing glance changes everything. What woke him from his indifference? Can she seize her power or vanish in his shadow? Watch till the end to know the ending. 3 years. Elena Brooks had lived for 3 long years, in a mansion too grand to ever feel like home, married to a man who never once looked at her like she mattered. The house, all glass and marble, was beautiful, in the way winter is beautiful, cold, still unfeeling. Nathaniel Cole, tech mogul, genius, admired by the world, had married her with the same detachment he probably signed mergers. No affection, no warmth, just terms and deadlines. From the very beginning, he was clear this wasn't a marriage of love. It was strategy, a transaction, a means to an end. Have you ever felt like just a footnote in someone else's plan? Elena remembered the wedding like a theater play she had no script in. Her dress had been flawless, her smile rehearsed, and Nathaniel's touch had been staged only when the photographer prompted. No heartfelt vows, only borrowed lines. No honeymoon, no whispered congratulations after the ceremony. Instead, they had flown home in silence, and he dropped her off at the mansion like a business guest checking into a long-term suite. That night, she cried herself to sleep in a room that wasn't his and never would be. She had agreed to the arrangement to save her father's company. Nathaniel's conglomerate had offered the bailout, but only if it came with a marriage. Her father was rescued. Her mother didn't collapse. Elena told herself it was temporary, that maybe in time he'd really see her. But he never did. He stayed locked in his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar contracts. She became invisible. Some mornings they passed each other like ghosts. A polite nod, no words. Same house, different worlds. She memorized his schedule to avoid him. He had breakfast at 6:15. She woke at 5:45, ate quietly, and disappeared before he came in. The routine, sterile and precise, became her new reality. And in some strange way, it was easier to stop hoping. Hope had teeth. Silence was softer. But at night, when all the lights dimmed and the walls stopped pretending, Elena would lie awake, wondering what had happened to the woman she used to be. The one who dreamed of launching her own firm, who spoke 3 languages, who graduated top of her class in international finance. That version of Elena had been fierce, full of light. Now she wore silence like a second skin, and once kept a tally of how many times Nathaniel said her name. 37. She stopped counting more than a year ago. Have you ever lost yourself in a relationship that gave nothing back? Still, she kept up appearances. That's what was expected of her. The media only knew her as Mrs. Cole, rarely seen, rarely quoted. She became an elegant shadow in heels. Nathaniel never brought her to events, never introduced her to his circle. There were no anniversaries, no getaways, no quiet expressions of care. On paper, they were perfect. In reality, Elena was a placeholder, an accessory in a CEO's curated life. Her college friends had stopped calling, some out of awkwardness, others because she had nothing left to say. Her parents tried to be grateful when they saw her grateful. She saved the family. But they couldn't meet her eyes for long. They knew. Everyone did. But no one said it aloud. Elena had become the offering, the living, breathing clause in a multi-million-dollar agreement. And yet she never fully broke. There were moments, fleeting, fragile, when she dared to dream of a different life. In the garden behind the mansion, with sunlight on her skin, she'd imagine what it might feel like to be loved. Not tolerated. Not owed. Just loved. A hand reaching for hers unprompted. A question like, "How was your day?" followed by someone who really cared about the answer. A dream distant and delicate like breath on glass. But it was enough to keep her alive. The worst part wasn't Nathaniel's distance, it was his neutrality. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't explosive, he was just absent. Like someone had cut out the part of him capable of caring. He gave her everything money could buy, but in 3 years, not once had he asked if she was happy. Not once had he wondered who she really was beyond the title of wife. In that silence, there was more pain than in any fight, and there were days when Elena wanted to scream. Not because of anything Nathaniel had done, but because of all the things he never did. How do you confront emptiness? How do you explain the ache of being untouched, unnoticed, unseen? She would sit in the sunroom, book open but unread, listening to the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, feeling the weight of absence like a blanket she couldn't kick off. She started writing again. Not publicly, not for the media, just private entries in a leather-bound journal, words she couldn't say out loud. Some pages were angry, some hopeful, some just blank because the silence felt too heavy for even ink to carry. She filled the pages with everything she was too afraid to say. She wrote to herself. She wrote to the girl she used to be. And so on the morning everything began to shift. Elena woke to the usual hum of the city outside and the familiar emptiness beside her. She tightened her robe and made her way to the kitchen, expecting the same 15-minute head start before Nathaniel appeared like a phantom. But something was different. There was an echo in the air, a shift in pressure, something unnameable. She didn't know it yet, but life as she knew it was about to fracture. Because that morning, for the first time in 3 years, Nathaniel spoke before she left the room. "Elena," he said. Just her name. Nothing more. But for her, it was everything. If you were Elena, what would you do in that moment? Elena heard his footsteps before she saw him. A calm, controlled rhythm echoing down the staircase like the ticking of an expensive watch. Her breath caught in her throat. It was only 6:03. Nathaniel Cole was never early. He was precise to the second, engineered like one of his smart tech systems. And yet, here he was, descending the marble steps in his usual black suit, crisp white shirt, and the kind of confidence that came from being untouchable. Her instincts kicked in, leave now vanish like always. But before she could slip away, his voice sliced through the silence. "Elena." One word spoken coolly, but it stopped her in her tracks like a shout. She hadn't heard him say her name in months. And even then, it had been flat transactional, like he was reading it off a list. But this time there was a sliver of something else. Not warmth, no, not yet. But awareness. He was looking at her. Really looking. Elena turned slowly, her fingers clenched around the edge of the kitchen island to keep from shaking. She met his gaze, those icy gray eyes that had once felt like concrete walls, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. Then he broke the stillness. "Do you have something appropriate to wear to a corporate gala?" Elena blinked. The words didn't compute. I'm sorry," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel's face didn't flinch. "A gala. Tomorrow night. For Coltech. You'll accompany me." The way he said it, like he was assigning her a meeting time. A logistical necessity. Her heart began to race, but not for the reasons he might have assumed. "Why?" she asked, forcing herself to stay calm. He exhaled slowly, as if annoyed he had to explain. "International investors will be present. There are rumors about my personal life. I need to appear stable." Then came the knife. "You're my wife, at least on paper." That phrase sliced her clean in half. On paper. It had always been the underlying truth, but hearing it said aloud by him felt like someone reading her soul's obituary. Elena straightened her back. "And what if I don't want to go?" she asked, her voice trembling but fierce. Nathaniel's brow arched slightly, as though surprised she had the nerve to resist. "That's not an option," he replied deadpan. "It's a duty." The word stung like acid. A duty. Like showing up for jury service. Like filing taxes. Like being forgotten. A duty, she repeated, her voice bitter. Like everything else in this marriage, right? For a fleeting second, something flickered in his expression. Regret. Doubt. But it disappeared before she could name it. "This event is important," he said, deflecting. 7-figure contracts. Eyes from the European board. You need to look presentable." Elena took a step closer, fury blossoming beneath her skin like wildfire. "Presentable," she echoed, locking eyes with him. "You don't even know me. In 3 years you've never asked who I am." "I know enough," he replied flatly. "You do," she challenged, voice rising. "Then tell me, Nathaniel, what's my favorite color? What degree did I earn? What do I do every day while you pretend I don't exist? His silence answered everything. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. And that nothing told her more than any words ever could. Elena nodded slowly, tears threatening but never falling. "I'll go to your gala, Mr. Cole," she said, "but not because it's my duty. I'll go because I want to see the world you chose over me." She turned and walked away, heels clicking softly against the tile. Behind her, Nathaniel stood completely still. For the first time in 3 years, he watched her, not just with his eyes, but with a dawning awareness that felt like the beginning of something dangerous. Elena had always been graceful, even in her quiet. But now she looked powerful, beautiful, and suddenly, painfully real. Upstairs, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, the storm still raging in her chest. The air felt heavier somehow, as though invisible walls were beginning to crack. She had stood up to him. After 3 years of playing invisible, of shrinking to fit the mold he placed her in, she had spoken. Loudly. Clearly. It was terrifying and liberating. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving in his shadow. She was stepping into the light. Downstairs, Nathaniel remained rooted in the kitchen, a strange sensation growing in his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't annoyance. It was something more unsettling. Something unfamiliar. Elena's voice, her defiance, echoed in his head. "You don't know me." She was right. And the realization hit him like a wrecking ball. He didn't know her. He had never even tried. And now, as the reality of what he might have lost stared back at him in the silence, Nathaniel Cole, master of logic, master of control, felt something unraveling. The next morning came with a different kind of quiet. Elena sat in front of her mirror, holding a simple navy blue dress against her frame. It was an elegant, modest one she had bought before the wedding, back when she still believed in dreams, in romance, in possibility. She hadn't worn it once in 3 years, but tonight she would wear it for herself. Not for Nathaniel, not for the cameras, but for the version of her that had been hidden too long. Because something had shifted, and though she didn't fully understand it yet, Elena Brooks could feel it in her bones. The game had begun to change. The lights of the Grand Lexington Hotel glimmered like a constellation of stars scattered across marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Elena stepped out of the car slowly, her fingers tightening around her black satin clutch. Her navy blue dress hugged her frame elegantly, her hair pinned in soft waves that framed her delicate jawline. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't look like the invisible woman in the background of someone else's life. She looked like she belonged, or at least she was willing to pretend she did. Beside her, Nathaniel straightened his tuxedo jacket with the same mechanical precision he applied to everything in life. He glanced at her briefly, his gaze lingering a second longer than usual. "You look appropriate," he said. The words were cold, but the hesitation in his eyes told another story. Elena didn't answer. She simply lifted her chin and stepped inside the hotel, the tall doors opening to a world that had never made space for her before tonight. Inside the ballroom was a living portrait of opulence men in tailored suits, sipping aged Scotch women in shimmering gowns, offering smiles as polished as their diamonds. Soft jazz played in the background, and the scent of wealth hung in the air like expensive perfume. Elena tried to steady her breathing. Every part of her wanted to shrink, to retreat into the role of silent accessory. But no, not tonight. She squared her shoulders, walking beside Nathaniel like an equal, even if she was faking it. They didn't speak. Not in the elevator, not in the foyer, not as they wove through the sea of conversations and champagne. Nathaniel placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her through the crowd with the detached courtesy of a chauffeur. Elena kept her eyes forward. Then suddenly someone stepped into their path, a tall man with a European charm and a disarming smile. "Nathaniel Cole," he greeted, extending his hand. "Finally, I get to meet the woman who's been hidden away all this time." Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Julian Hayes," he said. "This is my wife Elena." Julian turned to her with the kind of interest that wasn't rehearsed. He took her hand and kissed it softly. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Cole." Elena smiled, polite but measured. "Please call me Elena." "Well then, Elena," Julian said, eyes never leaving hers. "You're even more radiant than the rumors suggest." Elena blinked. "Rumors? I didn't realize there were any." Julian chuckled. "A woman married to the most eligible billionaire in New York and never seen in public. People notice." She felt Nathaniel stiffen beside her, but Julian's attention didn't waver. "Do you speak any other languages?" he asked, and Elena's posture relaxed slightly. "Yes, I'm fluent in French and Spanish, a bit of Italian too." His eyes lit up. "Magnifique. I have a few ventures in Latin America and could use someone with your expertise." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but Nathaniel cut in sharply. "Elena doesn't work." The words struck her like a slap. Her smile faltered, but Julian's expression only hardened with curiosity. "What a waste," he murmured. "A woman with that kind of skill set shouldn't be kept on the sidelines." "I'd love to help," Elena said, suddenly ignoring the warning in Nathaniel's eyes. "If your projects are serious, I'm interested." Julian grinned. "They are. I'll call you tomorrow, perhaps dinner to go over details." "She's busy," Nathaniel interrupted, voice icy. "Actually," Elena said, turning to face him, "I'm not." The challenge in her voice hung in the air. Julian looked pleased. 8 o'clock then. As he walked away, Nathaniel's hand closed around Elena's arm, just a little too tightly. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed under his breath. Elena pulled her arm back with sharp grace. "Having a civilized conversation. You should try it sometime." Nathaniel's eyes darkened, but something else simmered there too. Something hot, unspoken, and dangerous. "You're not having dinner with him." "Why not?" Elena shot back. "You said it yourself. I'm only your wife on paper. And on paper, I can do what I want." His mouth opened, but no words came. For the rest of the evening, Nathaniel never left her side. Wherever she turned, he was there like a shadow that had suddenly realized it needed the light. Every time Julian reappeared, Nathaniel would find a reason to intervene. It was possessive, controlling. But underneath it, Elena could feel something cracking open inside him. It was the first time she'd seen him react like a man with something to lose. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She felt dangerous. The drive home was silent, but the air between them pulsed with tension. When they arrived at the mansion, Nathaniel spoke first. "You're not seeing him again." "I am," Elena said, calm and sure. "Why?" "To remind myself I'm still a person," she said, turning to face him. "That I still matter. Something you've clearly forgotten." He said nothing, his jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might crack. She stepped out of the car and walked into the house without waiting for him. Upstairs, she leaned against the closed door, her heart pounding. Tonight had been many things, painful, empowering, terrifying. But above all, it had been a turning point. She had walked into that ballroom as Nathaniel's invisible wife. She left it as Elena Brooks, a woman he could no longer ignore. Nathaniel Cole was not used to losing control. He lived by precision, ruled by logic, made billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. But ever since that gala, his world had been tilting off its axis, and he couldn't stop the spiral. Julian Hayes. The name alone made his stomach twist. He saw it every time he closed his eyes, the way Julian had looked at Elena, the warmth in his voice, the ease of their conversation. But worse than that was Elena herself. The fire in her, the defiance, the way she had pulled her arm from his grip like it meant nothing. And maybe to her it did. The next morning, Nathaniel woke at 5:00 a.m. As always, but something was wrong. Restless. His body had slept, but his mind had been at war all night. He saw her in that navy blue dress, heard her voice steady, composed, lethal. "I'm not just your wife on paper." The words echoed like a gunshot. He got up, dragged his hand through his hair, and went downstairs. It was 6:00 a.m. The air smelled like fresh coffee. He paused in the hallway, stunned. She was already there. Elena sat at the counter wearing a thin gray robe, sipping from a ceramic mug with quiet composure. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, untouched by the day. She looked peaceful, yet distant, like someone who had already made a decision and wasn't afraid of it. Nathaniel watched her for a full minute without moving. She hadn't heard him. He was about to speak when she turned slowly and caught him staring. "You're looking at me," she said, without surprise. "Didn't expect that." Nathaniel cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you've decided to cancel tonight's dinner." Elena's expression didn't shift. She set the mug down gently. "No, I haven't." "Why not?" he asked, stepping closer. "What does this man have that's so important?" Her eyes narrowed with quiet precision. "Attention, respect, the feeling that I exist." Her words landed like blows. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. "You matter," he said softer now. "To you." She countered, standing to face him. "Because until last night I might as well have been wallpaper." He didn't deny it. Couldn't. There was silence, heavy and charged. Nathaniel stood too close. The soft morning light framed her face, and for the first time in 3 years, he truly saw the details, how the corners of her lips tightened when she was guarding herself, how her eyes gleamed with hurt she refused to show. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, voice low. "Like you're seeing a ghost." "Maybe I am," he whispered. "Or maybe I'm finally seeing my wife." Elena's breath caught, but she didn't let it show. "You've changed," she murmured almost to herself. "Yesterday you barely noticed me. Today you're acting like you care." Nathaniel exhaled shakily, as if wrestling with a truth he didn't want to face. "I don't know what's happening to me," he said, voice cracking for the first time. "I spent 3 years pretending you didn't exist, and now all I can think about is Julian Hayes touching your hand, making you smile." His honesty shocked her. The fire in his words wasn't corporate, it was human, raw, unfiltered. "That's jealousy," Elena said quietly. "Not love, is it?" He snapped, stepping away, hands trembling. "Because I don't know anymore. I just know I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was losing something I never realized I had." "You don't get to claim me now," she said, voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Not after 3 years of silence." "Then why didn't you leave?" he demanded, eyes blazing. "Why stay if you hated it so much?" "Because I hoped," she whispered. "Because I kept waiting for something, anything to change. Because I thought maybe you'd see me just once." Her voice broke, and Nathaniel took a step forward, then froze. "And now that I do," he asked, "what happens?" Elena turned from him, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. "Now I'm the one who needs time." "Time for what?" he asked, heart pounding. "To figure out if this new version of you is real," she said, "or just panic because someone else noticed me first." The words landed like a stone. Nathaniel closed his eyes, struggling with the war inside him. Business was simple. Contracts were clear. But this was chaos, and it terrified him. What if I said I want to be your husband now? Not on paper. For real. Elena turned back, eyes full of history and heartbreak. "Then you better learn how to fight for something that isn't profit." That night she went to dinner with Julian. Nathaniel didn't follow, but he stood at the window for 2 hours watching the driveway, his fists clenched, wondering if she would come home, and knowing that if she didn't, it would be the first time in his life that something truly priceless had slipped through his fingers. The house was still when Elena returned. Past midnight, the marble floors glowed silver under moonlight spilling through the massive windows. She moved quietly, her heels softly tapping like echoes of a woman she no longer recognized. The dinner with Julian had gone smoothly, too smoothly maybe. He was kind, intelligent, and genuinely interested in her, but her mind hadn't stayed present. It kept drifting back here to this house, this silence, and to the man who, against all logic, had finally begun to stir something in her heart after 3 long years of nothing. She didn't expect him to be awake. He rarely was when it mattered. So when she passed the living room and saw him sitting in the lamplight, her heart stuttered. Nathaniel sat hunched forward on the edge of the couch, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, the first few buttons undone. He looked almost human. The untouchable CEO stripped of armor. His gaze lifted the moment she entered. "You came back," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't relief. It was wonder, like he hadn't dared hope it would happen. Elena didn't answer. She wasn't sure she trusted her voice yet. She stood in the doorway watching him watch her. "How was it?" he asked after a pause. "Dinner with Julian Hayes." His voice was carefully neutral, but the storm in his eyes betrayed him. "It was fine," she said, tone cool. "We talked about business. Argentina, Chile. He wants me to advise on expansion strategy." Nathaniel exhaled sharply through his nose, a sound that was almost a laugh, almost pain. "Did he touch you?" The question fell between them like a blade. Elena didn't flinch. "He held my hand when the wine arrived. Briefly, respectfully." Nathaniel looked away, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed to hurt. "Right," he muttered. "Of course. Why wouldn't he? You're brilliant. Beautiful. And I handed you to him on a silver platter." Elena's brow furrowed. "You didn't hand me to anyone, Nathaniel. You left me alone so long I had to remember I existed." He nodded slowly, the weight of her words visibly sinking into his spine. "I deserve that," he whispered. "I've deserved that for a long time." He stood pacing the floor like a man trying to outrun something inside himself. "I don't know what's wrong with me, Elena. I don't know why I pushed you away. I think I was afraid." She crossed her arms cautiously, intrigued. Afraid of what? Of love, of needing someone. He turned to face her then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch pure vulnerability. "Yes," he said. "Exactly that. I know how to negotiate. I know how to dominate a boardroom, dismantle a hostile takeover, predict market trends 5 quarters in advance. But love, I don't know the rules. And when they told me marrying you would save your family, help mine, keep both companies alive, I thought I was doing the right thing. A strategic partnership. I didn't realize I was destroying something I didn't yet understand." Elena's heart thudded in her chest. This wasn't the cold, polished man she had married. This was someone cracked open, bleeding truth. "And now?" she asked, her voice softer. "Now I can't sleep," he said, eyes locked on hers. "Now I replay every morning I ignored you, every look I failed to give, every word I never spoke. I remember you crying in the garden once and I walked away. I hate myself for that. I hate how long it took me to see the woman standing right in front of me." He stepped closer slowly, like approaching something fragile. "I don't deserve you. I know that. But I still love you." The words hit her like a wave. She had imagined them before in dreams and arguments she rehearsed to the ceiling at night, but hearing them now raw and shaking in the dark felt almost too much. She looked away, her voice catching. "Nathaniel, 3 years is a long time. I gave up on you 100 times, and yet here I am. I don't even know why. Because you have more strength in your little finger than I do in my whole body," he said. "Because you've loved without being loved. And I see that now. God, I see it." He reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. His touch was warm, trembling. "I don't know what comes next," he said, "but I know I want to wake up and ask you how you slept. I want to fight with you over what to order for dinner. I want to learn what makes you laugh and never stop chasing it. I want to build something real, from nothing if I have to." Her heart ached under the weight of everything she'd carried alone for so long. The pain, the loneliness, the loss of herself. But now he was offering something different, not a promise of perfection, but a vow to try. She stepped forward, cupped his cheek gently. "Words aren't enough anymore, Nathaniel," she said. "Not after all this time." "Then let me show you," he whispered. "Every day, in every way I can. Let me learn how to be the man you deserve." He leaned his forehead against hers, eyes closed, breath shaky. "I'll get it wrong sometimes. I'll stumble. But I won't stop trying. You've waited long enough for someone to see you, Elena. I swear I'll never look away again." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something deep and unspoken, something fragile but growing. She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. The pain wasn't gone, but it had a companion, now hope, a flicker of something that might just survive if nurtured. When she opened her eyes, He was still there, waiting. "Then show me," she said. "Don't promise. Prove it." And for the first time in the quietest of ways, Nathaniel Cole began to love not with flowers or grand gestures, but with honesty, humility, and a heart finally learning how to beat for someone else. The next morning, Elena woke to a scent that didn't belong to silence. Warmth, vanilla, something sweet. She blinked into the soft light spilling through the bedroom curtains and sat up slowly. For a moment, she forgot where she was until she saw the tray beside her on the bed, pancakes drizzled with maple syrup, a bowl of fresh strawberries, and 2 mugs of coffee. There was even a single white rose in a slender glass. She turned startled and saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway. Not in a suit, not in armor. Just jeans, a soft gray shirt, and eyes that held a nervous light she had never seen before. "Morning," he said, almost sheepishly. "I made breakfast." Elena stared at him. "You cook?" "In college," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's been a while. They're probably awful." She looked back at the tray, then at him again. The effort was clumsy, endearing, real. It didn't fit the image of the Nathaniel she'd lived with for 3 years. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. He stepped forward, set his own mug down beside hers. "Because I want to earn this," he said. "I want to start over. And I know it has to start small." Elena picked up her fork, slowly tasting the pancake. It was slightly burned at the edges. Imperfect, and yet it was the best thing she'd eaten in years, not because of flavor, but because of intent. "It's not bad," she said, then glanced at him. "Don't look so surprised." He laughed under his breath, and she saw something soften in his face. The lines of power gave way to something gentler. He sat down beside her on the bed, not touching her, just close. She could feel the warmth radiating off him, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. They ate in silence for a moment. Not the old silence, the one that used to fill every corner of this house like fog, but a new kind. Companionable, curious. After breakfast, he didn't rush to get dressed. He didn't disappear behind office doors. Instead, he asked if she wanted to go for a walk. In the garden he hadn't set foot in since their wedding day, and when they walked among the roses and climbing ivy. Elena found herself talking about small things, books, music, a documentary she liked, and Nathaniel listened, really listened. No phone in hand, no watch tapping against his wrist. That night he asked if she wanted to watch a movie. She said no, but he left the living room door open, left the volume low, just in case she changed her mind. The next morning there were fresh flowers in the kitchen peonies, her favorite. A tiny card, still learning but paying attention. That afternoon, he showed up unexpectedly with takeout from the little Thai place she once mentioned in passing 2 years ago in the middle of a rare dinner conversation. "I remembered," he said, quietly handing her the bag. "I wrote it down, thought I'd try again." Each day after that brought something new, small changes, not grand gestures but thoughtful ones. He started asking how she slept, what she dreamed about, if she was happy, and when she said she wasn't sure yet, he didn't retreat. He nodded and said, "Fair." One morning she found him reading a novel she'd left on the coffee table, one she loved, one he would have mocked before. "I want to understand what you love," he explained, not looking up from the page, and somehow it cracked something inside her, wide open. A week passed, then 2, and Elena found herself waking up not to dread, but to possibility. The version of Nathaniel she saw now, the man who asked, who listened, who remembered, was not the one she'd married. It was someone emerging from the ruins. Someone who still had walls, yes, but who was trying to let her inside them. One evening as the sun set, in golden ribbons across the porch, he brought her a cup of chamomile tea. "You always drink it when your shoulders are tense," he said. She hadn't even realized he'd noticed that. She took the cup, fingers brushing his, and in that moment, she felt something terrifying, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't entirely lost between them. That maybe the man she'd spent 3 years hating was learning how to love her in return. She watched the way he looked at her now, not like a possession, not like an obligation, but like a man watching his miracle walk back into the room. And despite the ache of all she'd endured, Elena felt her heart stir. That night, when he asked if she'd sit beside him during a movie, she said yes. And when he reached for her hand, halfway through the film, she let him take it. His grip was hesitant, almost reverent. Like he knew it wasn't just a hand, it was trust. It was her choosing to stay in that moment when she could have walked away. And as the credits rolled and the house went quiet, she didn't pull away. She leaned her head on his shoulder. No words, no promises, just presence. And maybe Elena thought as her eyes fluttered shut and she let herself rest against him. This was how love begins again, not with fireworks or declarations, but with softness, with staying, with being seen. And finally, after 3 years of being invisible, she was being seen. Not by the world, but by the one person who should have looked all along. The day started out quietly, too quietly. Nathaniel had left early for a board meeting, leaving a note on the counter with a fresh latte. Back by 6. Let's make dinner together. N. It made Elena smile, even blush a little, something she hadn't done in years because of him. The house was peaceful, and for once the silence didn't feel heavy. She spent the morning organizing the upstairs library, sorting through old papers and books Nathaniel had said he'd get to eventually. She liked the rhythm of it, simple, grounding, almost meditative, until she knocked over a stack of folders hidden behind the desk. They spilled across the floor in a fan of crisp white sheets and paper-clipped stacks. Most were boring finance reports, expansion models, board memos, but one thick black folder stood out. It had no label. Curiosity tugged at her and she opened it slowly, not knowing the moment would break her open. Inside were contracts, legal, detailed, horrifying. The name Brooks caught her eye immediately. Her family's company, her father's name, her own. And then she saw the title in bold: Merger Acquisition Agreement, Cole Enterprises and Brooks Accounting, conditional on marital union. Her breath hitched. Hands trembling, she flipped through page after page, the truth crashing over her like a violent wave. It was all there. The terms of the merger, the money exchanged, and then, like a dagger in ink, clauses about her marriage, that it must last a minimum of 5 years, that public appearances were required to maintain stability of investor confidence, even provisions regarding children. Her stomach turned. She wasn't just part of a business deal. She was the collateral, a condition, a transaction signed and sealed in boardrooms before she ever said "I do." Elena dropped the folder and staggered back, hand over her mouth, as if the truth had a taste and it was poison. The room spun. The Nathaniel she'd been getting to know, the one who brought her tea and remembered her favorite flowers, had known all along. And yet, he'd said nothing. Let her believe this was changing, that maybe love was blooming from ashes. But no, the ashes were still burning. She sank into the desk chair, numb. 3 years of being invisible. And now that she was finally being seen, it was just a continuation of the lie. By the time she heard the garage door later that evening, she was no longer angry, she was ice. Nathaniel walked in with his tie loosened and 2 bags of groceries in hand, smiling like a man who had no idea a bomb was about to drop. "Elena," he called, "you're not going to believe the fresh pasta I found." She stepped into the kitchen doorway holding the folder. His smile froze. "Can you explain this?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence was loud enough. Nathaniel's face drained of color. "Elena, I can..." "Don't lie to me," she said, stepping closer. "Just tell me. Did you know our marriage was part of a corporate deal?" He looked down as if the floor might save him. "I knew there were financial incentives." "Incentives?" she snapped. "Is that what you call selling me like a strategic asset? There's a clause about children, Nathaniel. Did you plan those too?" "No," he said quickly, panicked now. "Elena, I didn't write that contract. My father, our legal team." "Yes, there was a merger. But when I met you, when you met me, you said nothing." She cut in. "You let me believe this marriage was a lifeline for my family. You didn't mention it was also your company's golden ticket." He stepped forward, but she backed away. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you before I had a chance to change," he said. "But I have changed, Elena. You knew last week." You knew when you kissed me, when you made me believe I wasn't just a piece of paperwork anymore." Her voice broke. "You knew, and you still said nothing." "Because I didn't want to lose you," he whispered. "Then you shouldn't have lied," she said. "Because now you already have." Elena turned and walked up the stairs, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She packed a suitcase in silence. The things she had grown to love in this house, the books, the warmth, the possibility, were suddenly suffocating. When Nathaniel entered the room, she didn't look at him. "Please," he said. "Don't leave. We can fix this." "You don't even know what needs fixing," she replied, zipping her suitcase. "It's not just the lie. It's the foundation you built everything on. You didn't fall in love with me, you inherited me, like property." "That's not true," he shouted. "Then prove it," she said coldly. "Undo the merger. Give my parents their company back. Give up everything you gained because of me." He froze. A full beat passed, and his silence was her answer. "That's what I thought," Elena said, lifting her suitcase. "You want love without sacrifice, but that's not love. That's convenience." "Elena, don't," she whispered. "You had 3 years to see me. And when you finally did, it was through the lens of profit." She walked past him down the stairs out the front door. The man she'd started to believe in again didn't follow, didn't fight, just stood frozen in his perfect house, holding a broken folder in trembling hands. Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He didn't move. He sat in the kitchen with his head in his hands, surrounded by dinner that never got made and silence that felt like punishment. Elena was gone. Her suitcase, her perfume, her presence. The moment the door closed behind her, something inside him cracked wide open, and for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Cole understood what it meant to truly lose. He'd spent years building a life of certainty, contracts, power logic, and now none of it meant a damn thing, because the only thing that had ever mattered had just walked out. At dawn, he drove to the office, not because of meetings, not for numbers, but because it was the one place where the truth had been born. The merger, the contract, the mistake that had started it all. He stood in the boardroom alone, staring at the table where they had planned her life without her consent. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Marriage is leverage. Emotion is noise." Nathaniel felt sick. He pulled out the documents, laid them flat on the table. All of it. Every signature. Every condition. And then with shaking hands, he called the legal team. The boardroom filled quickly. Executives, lawyers, his father. They looked confused, even irritated. Nathaniel stood at the head of the table and said 5 words that silenced them all. "I'm voiding the Brooks merger." Gasps rippled through the room. "You're what?" his father snapped, standing. "You do that, we lose 17 million in leverage. Our projections will—" "I don't care about the projections," Nathaniel said louder now. "I care about Elena, and I care about fixing what I destroyed." "This is madness," the CFO muttered. "That woman has clearly manipulated." "She didn't ask for any of this," Nathaniel roared. "We used her. I used her. And now I'm undoing it." His father stepped forward, livid. "You're throwing away a multi-million-dollar deal for a woman who left you." Nathaniel met his gaze coldly. "No, I'm doing it for the woman I should have fought for from the beginning. And if that costs me money, reputation, or even my job, so be it." The room froze. No one spoke. In the silence, Nathaniel signed the termination orders himself, pushing the papers across the table. "Send her father's company back debt-free. Every cent we gained from the merger, return it. And if anyone objects, you can consider my resignation part of the package." By noon, it was done. The news broke within hours. Cole Enterprises withdraws from merger. CEO forfeits stake to honor personal relationship. Elena's phone buzzed endlessly as media outlets speculated wildly. But she didn't answer. She sat in her sister's apartment, stunned. Her father called, voice trembling. "Elena," he returned everything. The shares, the assets, even the legal rights. He said he was just making it right. She clutched the phone, speechless. The man who once valued control above all else had just handed over his empire piece by piece for her. 3 days passed. Elena didn't call him, not because she wasn't moved, but because she didn't know how to believe it. Words were easy, regret was common, but real sacrifice was rare. On the 4th day, a letter arrived, handwritten, no assistants, no signatures, just Nathaniel's handwriting raw and uneven across the page. I broke everything that ever mattered to me, and I would break 1,000 more deals if it meant you would come back. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild, not our contract, our story. That night she drove, through the city, through memories, through hope that hurt. And when she reached the mansion, she sat outside for a long time, unsure. The lights were on. She could see him in the kitchen sleeves rolled, cooking something that was definitely burning. She stepped out of the car slowly, every part of her trembling. He didn't see her at first. He was humming off-key, stirring pasta in a sauce that clearly didn't know what it wanted to be. Then he turned, and the world stopped. Elena, he breathed. She nodded, eyes shining. You're a terrible cook. He laughed a short, stunned sound and stepped closer. I'm trying. Again. Still. She looked around. The kitchen was a mess. The house smelled like basil and desperation. And somehow it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Why did you really do it? She asked. You could have just said you were sorry. Nathaniel's voice cracked. Because sorry was too small for what I did. And because I love you. No more silence. No more contracts. Just me, every day proving it. She stepped forward, heart thundering. Then prove it now, she whispered. Right now. He didn't hesitate. He took her face in his hands and kissed her like a promise, slow, reverent, full of everything he'd never said and now never would stop saying. It wasn't a kiss of apology. It was a kiss of redemption, of devotion, of home. Elena had been feeling different for days, not sick, just off. Her body felt heavier in strange moments, her moods shifting like waves she couldn't explain. There were mornings she stood in the garden and felt tears gather in her eyes without reason, and nights when she couldn't sleep lying beside Nathaniel while he gently traced her fingers like a man afraid she might vanish. Something inside her was changing, softening, stretching, becoming more. It wasn't until she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, holding the little white stick in trembling hands, that it all began to make sense. The plus sign appeared slowly, quiet, certain, like the most beautiful whisper she'd ever seen. She sat down on the edge of the tub, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. Pregnant. She was pregnant. 1,000 emotions collided inside her. Joy, fear, wonder, panic. The timing was impossible and yet perfect. Just weeks ago, she had walked away from the man who once couldn't look her in the eye. Now that same man was trying every day to love her without armor. And now this, a new life. A new chapter. Something born from all the hurt and healing. It felt like the universe was handing her a second beginning. Elena didn't tell Nathaniel right away. She needed time to sit with it, to hold the secret close and protect it for a little while. That day, he took her to the farmer's market and insisted on picking every apple himself. He kissed her forehead when she wasn't looking, told her she made the best coffee in New York, even though he'd always secretly preferred tea. She watched him carefully, this man who once didn't know how to love, and saw the truth of who he was becoming. Not perfect, not polished, but present, real, and maybe ready. That night, she tucked the test into a velvet pouch and placed it in the drawer beside her bed. Then she lay down beside him, listening to his heartbeat. What are you thinking about? He asked softly, his fingers brushing her wrist. The future, she whispered. He smiled and kissed her temple. I've been thinking about that too. But even then, she didn't say it. Not yet. She wanted the moment to be right. Wanted the words to come with more than just surprise, with joy, with hope, with the kind of intimacy they'd fought so hard to rebuild. 2 days later, it came to her like a breath. They were standing in the nursery, that empty room at the end of the hallway they never used. Nathaniel had casually said, "We should turn this into something. A guest room, a reading space." But as the sunlight streamed across the wood floor, painting warmth across the quiet, Elena turned to him and said simply, "What if we didn't?" He looked confused for a moment. "Didn't what?" "Didn't turn it into something for guests," she clarified, voice trembling slightly. "What if it became a nursery?" The realization hit him like a wave, but he didn't panic. His eyes searched hers, looking for certainty, for fear. "Elena," he whispered, barely breathing. "Are you?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I found out 3 days ago. I wasn't sure how to tell you. I wanted it to feel real, wanted you to be ready." He stepped forward slowly, as if afraid she might fade. "I'm ready," he said, voice cracking. "God, I'm so ready." She let out a shaky breath, and then he was holding her arms wrapped around her like shelter, forehead pressed to hers, both of them trembling in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I don't deserve this," he murmured, voice breaking. "But I swear I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." "It's not about what you deserve," she whispered back. "It's about what we build now, together." He kissed her, then not the desperate kiss of regret, but the quiet reverence of a man who finally understood what love truly meant. There were no boardrooms here, no contracts or contingencies. Just two people holding each other in the warm light of an empty room that had suddenly become a promise. For the first time in her life, Elena didn't feel like a pawn in someone else's game. She felt like a creator, a mother, a woman who had survived being invisible and had learned how to make herself seen. Nathaniel didn't pull away once. He didn't try to fix it with money or power. He just held her, asked questions, wondered aloud if their child would have her laugh, her stubbornness, her courage. And when she cried, because sometimes the emotion came like waves he couldn't stop, he kissed her cheeks and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." That night, as they lay in bed, his hand on her stomach, Elena realized something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. The road had been long, full of mistakes and silence and aching loneliness, but somehow from all of it, something new had formed. Life. Not just the one inside her, but the one between them. Real love. Earned love. And as Nathaniel drifted to sleep beside her, she whispered to the dark, "You're going to be a good father." And for the first time, she believed it. The sky was heavy with clouds the morning Nathaniel told her he had something planned. Elena raised an eyebrow as he buttoned his shirt. Not a suit, but a soft, pale blue one he only wore when he didn't want to look like a CEO. "No meetings?" she asked, half teasing. "No spreadsheets?" He smiled as he leaned in to kiss her forehead. "Only one meeting today. The most important one I'll ever have." She narrowed her eyes in curiosity, but said nothing, letting herself enjoy the mystery. Something about him felt different, not nervous, but grounded, like a man standing on the edge of something sacred. He drove her 2 hours upstate past wildflowers and winding roads until they reached a small vineyard tucked into a quiet hillside. The sky had cleared by then, streaks of sunlight breaking through the gray. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand, leading her down a path lined with lavender. At the end stood a small white gazebo, simple and elegant, surrounded by hanging lights that swayed in the breeze. It looked like something from a dream. And waiting there just inside the archway was a man in a black suit. A minister. Elena froze. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her hand trembling in his. "What is this?" He turned to her eyes, soft and steady. "A do-over," he said. "A vow we never meant. A promise we never made. I want to marry you again, Elena. For real this time. No contracts. No boardroom deals. Just me and you. And this baby. Our family. Our future." She blinked, tears already rushing to the surface. "You don't have to do this to prove anything." "I know," he said gently. "I'm not doing this to fix the past. I'm doing it to honor what we survived and what we're building." He guided her to the center of the gazebo. She could barely breathe. There was no music, no guests, just Wild wind, sun-dappled trees, and the sound of two hearts learning to beat in rhythm again. The minister looked to Nathaniel, who nodded. Then he turned to Elena, pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his pocket, and unfolded it slowly. "I never wrote vows the first time," he began, voice steady but full, "because I didn't believe in them. I thought marriage was a business transaction. I thought love was a distraction. I was wrong. I didn't know how to love you then, Elena. I didn't even know how to see you. You were right there, and I treated you like a name on a contract. But somewhere along the way, in the silence and the mornings you left before I came down, I started to notice everything. Your strength, your grace, the way you made this house feel like a home even when I didn't deserve it. And I hated myself for not knowing how to tell you, for making you believe you were invisible." He paused, breath-catching. "You could have left 100 times. But you stayed. You waited. Not because you were weak, but because you believed in something I hadn't earned yet. You waited until I caught up, until I became a man who could stand in front of you like this. Not because I'm perfect, but because I'm finally ready to love you the way you always deserved." His eyes burned with emotion. "I love you, Elena, and I vow from this day forward to never look away again, to never let silence be stronger than love, to show up, even when I'm tired, even when I'm scared, especially then." Elena was crying now, her fingers covering her lips as if holding back a flood. He reached out, gently lowered her hands and whispered, "Say something." She laughed softly, tears shimmering like stars. "I don't have a speech," she said. I didn't think I'd ever get this." "Then say what's in your heart," he said. She took a breath, trembling, and stepped closer. "I spent years wondering if love was something you earned or something that just happened. And for the longest time I thought I'd failed, that I wasn't enough to make you see me. But I see now," she said, voice breaking. "You weren't blind. You were broken. And so was I. But somehow we found our way back to each other, not as the people we were, but as the people we are now. Stronger, softer, honest." She took his hands, pressed them to her heart. "I don't need a ring or a room full of people to believe in us. I just need this. Your hands, your voice, your heart, learning how to love out loud." He smiled through his tears, his thumb brushing her cheek. The minister stepped back, giving them space, and Nathaniel pulled a simple silver band from his pocket. "It's not flashy," he said, "but it's real." Elena laughed through her tears, "Just like us." He slipped it onto her finger, then leaned forward and kissed her, soft, reverent, full of gratitude, and 100 promises spoken without words. The wind swirled gently around them, carrying lavender petals like confetti, and in that moment nothing else mattered. No mistakes, no contracts, just this love reborn. The first twinge came on a Thursday afternoon, subtle enough that Elena barely noticed it. She was in the nursery, folding a stack of impossibly tiny onesies Nathaniel had chosen with the same seriousness he once used to select hedge fund partners. Her back ached, but she dismissed it as another late pregnancy discomfort. At nearly 39 weeks, her body was already a map of exhaustion and anticipation. The nursery smelled like lavender and clean linen, the late spring sun warming the polished floor. She reached for a baby blanket, and then paused, her breath catching as a dull pressure wrapped around her lower belly. Not sharp, not sudden, but different. Her heart skipped. She placed a hand over the swell of her stomach, whispering, "Not yet, just a little longer." By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the discomfort had sharpened. Elena tried to hide it, tried to be normal. She helped Nathaniel prep dinner, laughed when he nearly set the rosemary on fire, sat across from him at the table while he told her about a new nonprofit he wanted to fund in their son's name. But her eyes kept drifting toward the clock, every 10 minutes, then 8. Nathaniel noticed the shift before she said anything. He reached across the table, placing his hand over hers, and asked softly, "How far apart?" Her silence gave him the answer. He stood immediately, calm, focused, protective. "We're going to the hospital, now." The car ride felt endless and impossibly fast all at once. Elena breathed through the contractions, counting in her head, her fingers gripping the door handle. Nathaniel kept one hand on the wheel and the other reaching toward her thumb, gently stroking her wrist between waves of pain. "You're okay," he said, voice even. "We're almost there." At a red light, he turned to her, his eyes blazing with quiet determination. "I've got you. Every second. You don't do this alone." She nodded, teeth clenched. It was strange, surreal watching him like this, her stone-cold husband turned into someone who would burn the world to make sure she made it through. At the hospital, everything moved fast. A wheelchair, nurses, machines beeping, a soft-spoken doctor explaining that she was in active labor and already dilated. Elena tried to focus, but everything blurred: the lights, the smells, the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. When they wheeled her into the delivery room, panic clawed at her chest. But then Nathaniel was there, pulling on the blue scrubs, fumbling with the cap, his hands shaking just enough to prove he was human. When he stepped to her side, took her hand and kissed her knuckles, the fear quieted. "Breathe," he whispered. "We're in this together." The hours stretched endlessly. Contractions came harder, closer, like waves that wouldn't let her surface. She cried, screamed, begged for it to stop. Nathaniel never let go of her hand, never looked away. When her body curled with pain, he leaned in and whispered, "You're doing incredible." When she said she couldn't go on, he pressed her sweat-drenched forehead to his and whispered, "Then I'll carry you through this." No assistant, no bodyguard, no luxury could save them from this moment, and he didn't want them to. He wanted to be in the storm with her, even if it tore him apart. Near dawn, Elena collapsed back against the bed, sobbing as another contraction ripped through her. "I can't," she cried, her voice breaking. "I'm too tired." Nathaniel kissed her hand, tears streaming down his own face now. "You can. You are. You're the strongest person I've ever known." He brushed the hair from her face and held her gaze. "Look at me. You are not alone. I'm right here. And I love you. So damn much." Something shifted in her. Then not the pain, not the exhaustion, but the fear. It melted. Because he meant it. Because this was real. Not a show. Not a performance. But a man holding his world together with trembling hands and unwavering love. The moment their son entered the world, time paused. One last push. One final cry from her lungs, and then a louder one, strong and new and alive. The doctor caught him, announced, "It's a boy," and placed him on Elena's chest. She sobbed, relief, joy, awe. Nathaniel leaned over, pressing his forehead to hers as they both looked down at the tiny miracle between them. "Jacob," he whispered. "He's perfect." He kissed Elena's cheek, her temple, her lips. "You did it," he said. "You brought him here. You brought us here." He cut the cord himself, hands steady despite the tears. He held Jacob with the same reverence he once reserved for closing deals. But this was no transaction. This was love, pure, unfiltered. Elena watched as he cradled their son, whispering things she couldn't hear but could feel in her soul. Later, when they were alone in the quiet room, the nurses gone, and Jacob nestled between them. Nathaniel climbed into the narrow bed beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She leaned against him, exhausted, but whole. "You were everything I needed tonight," she whispered. "I didn't think you'd be strong enough." He turned to her eyes, red voice soft. "I wasn't. But you made me stronger." He placed his palm over Jacob's chest. "You gave me something real to protect. And I will. For the rest of my life." In the hush that followed, they lay in silence, not empty, but full. Of breaths, of heartbeat, of love. The kind that had been broken and rebuilt. The kind born not from perfection, but from choosing each other again and again, even in the hardest moments, especially then. The morning sunlight spilled through the nursery windows, casting golden warmth across the soft pastel walls, and the quiet breathing of a house that had once been hollow but now overflowed with life. Elena stood by the crib, her fingers gently tracing the rim as Jacob lay swaddled in a blanket, patterned with little stars. He had Nathaniel's mouth, her eyes, and something neither of them could explain. A peace, a stillness that seemed too big for someone so new. Behind her, footsteps creaked on the floorboards, and Nathaniel appeared carrying 2 steaming mugs. He looked like any other man in pajama pants and a wrinkled t-shirt, but she knew better. She knew what he had walked through to become this version of himself. They sat side by side on the window seat, sipping tea, letting silence stretch between them. Not uncomfortable, not empty, but full. The kind of silence you earned. Outside, the trees danced in the breeze, the world spinning at its usual frantic pace. But here inside this small, imperfect house, time seemed to pause. "Do you ever think about who we used to be?" Elena asked softly, her eyes still on their son. Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He reached for her free hand and interlaced their fingers. All the time he said, "And I don't recognize that man anymore. But I remember him. I remember hurting you, missing you, without even knowing what I was missing. And I remember the moment it changed." Elena nodded, her heart squeezing with the memories, the cold dinners, the long silences, the look on his face, the night she almost didn't come back. "I don't think we fell in love like most people do," she said. "There was no beginning, no spark, just obligation, contracts, distance." He turned to her eyes, soft. "And yet, here we are," she laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "Because we didn't fall in love. We built it, brick by brick, through every fight, every apology, every time you held me without words and made me feel like I mattered." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's what makes it real." Later that afternoon, she opened the drawer where the contract still lived. The original one. The one that had dictated their marriage, their lives, and almost destroyed them both. She pulled it out and stared at it, the pages yellowed at the edges. Nathaniel came to her side, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to get rid of it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I want to keep it. Not because it matters now, but because it reminds me of what we survived, what we overcame. That even something built on lies can be turned into truth if you fight hard enough." They placed it in a box, tucked it away, not out of guilt, but reverence. That evening, they laid Jacob in his bassinet and curled up on the couch under a soft blanket. The television played something neither of them watched. Instead, they talked about the future, about fears, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. "I'm scared," Elena admitted, "not of the baby, but of messing it up, of becoming the kind of woman who loses herself in motherhood, in loving too much too hard." Nathaniel turned to her, brushing hair behind her ear. "Then I'll remind you who you are," he said. "Every time. I'll say your name louder than the fear. I'll love you not just as a mother, but as Elena, my Elena." Weeks passed, then months. The house grew louder, laughter, cries, lullabies, and yet more peaceful in ways they hadn't expected. They weren't perfect. Nathaniel still worked too late sometimes. Elena still snapped when she was overwhelmed, but they had learned something sacred: how to come back to each other. How to apologize, to ask, to listen. Nathaniel no longer left her in silence. Elena no longer folded into herself when hurt. They leaned. They stayed. One night, while watching Jacob sleep, Nathaniel whispered, "Do you think people like us were meant for this?" Elena looked at him, her heart full. "I think we became meant for it, because we never stopped trying." They told Jacob the truth when he was older, about their marriage, about how it started with anything but love. They didn't sugarcoat it. They said real love doesn't always begin with magic. Sometimes it begins with pain. But the beauty is in what you do with it. Nathaniel added, "And when you choose someone, even after they've hurt you, even after you've hurt them and they choose you back, that's the kind of love that changes everything." Jacob grew up knowing that strength wasn't loud. It was in staying, in building, in healing what was broken. Their story wasn't legendary. It wouldn't be written in history books or made into movies. But it was theirs, raw, flawed, sacred. It taught them both that love wasn't something you found. It was something you chose again and again, even on the hardest days. Especially then. It was folding laundry at midnight while the baby screamed. It was whispering, "I'm sorry," and meaning it. It was holding each other through the past and building a new future with bare hands. And it was kissing her on the porch one quiet evening just like he did the first time he truly saw her. So if you're reading this, watching this, feeling like love is slipping through your fingers, remember this. Sometimes the best love stories don't begin with fireworks. Sometimes they begin with silence, with pain, with a question left unanswered for too long. But if you're lucky, if you're brave, you'll get the chance to answer it. And if you do, will you be strong enough to stay? Will you fight for the love that doesn't come easy but comes back?